Call to order. Open forum for any non-agenda items. Any body that wishes to speak to an item that is not already on the agenda may do so for 3 minutes. Roy.
Got handouts, and if you need the details of this, I can send it to you. Okay. And you may want to take a look at this. Okay, good evening. My name's Roy Wolford. I live at 37 Seawolf Passage in Mariner Cove. And I wanted to just let the flood board know that this is the 10th anniversary. Actually, one day longer than it's the April 8th. On April 7th, 10 years ago, the Public Works Department convened a meeting for all those of us that were drawn into the FEMA flood zone. And it was a meeting on insurance, and it was a very good meeting. They had FEMA, USGS, towns folks here. There was actually at the rec hall. And the USGS made it very clear that the primary reason for us being drawn into the flood zone was settlement. And that's a very important factor. And then back in October, this past October 2018, there was a presentation on earthquakes, and that was a very excellent presentation. We all know that Mariner Cove is landfill built on bay mud, so it's settled a lot. USGS had said it was 6 to 8 feet of settlement, up to. We know it's from zero, from bedrock, going out to far reaches of the bay. So the town produces a very fine publication. I think it's at the behest of the Flood Control Board, and it's the Flood Prevention and Protection document. It comes out each year. I would like to request that a change be made on page 1 that shows 4 sources of flooding and adding in settlement, because we know that is the primary cause of the flooding. Had we not had settlement, we wouldn't be in the flood zone. So all we have to do is look at the flood map to see that on the parts of Mariner Cove out toward Paradise Drive, those areas are not in the flood zone. The other item I would like to request a change on to this fine publication is on page 3, and that has to do with the insurance coverage. Talks mainly about the FEMA insurance, but there are other insurances, so we may want to add something like that, Cal Flood. But the FEMA also says you get a 15% discount because of the precautions and measures the town has taken to prevent and protect against flooding. But that 15% doesn't apply to those of us who took advantage of the insurance prior to being drawn into the flood zone. So back in 2009, we purchased our insurance for $177 a year. It is now up to about $572 a year. So that 15% does not apply to those grandfathered in because we're already getting a lower rate. The third item, and again, this is in the documentation, I'd encourage the town staff, or I'm going too far. On number 2, consider when we take a look at what we're doing with flooding and the dollars we're spending, take a look at possible earthquake damage too. So again, being landfill on bay muds, we can get hit with liquefaction, which could break foundations. And that was one of the things that came out in that presentation back in last year in October. And there's 2 things that can remedy the liquefaction. One is to do pilings, but that's going to be very expensive if you have to do pilings up to 100 feet of bay mud, which is over in Mariner Cove. Or you can put a foundation in, a slab, and basically build up the foundation from there, raise the house, and it would act as a boat. So that would protect it. So those are the 2 areas. Doing the slab foundation could cost approximately $125,000. But if we protect against flood, but we don't protect against earthquakes, we're only protecting it against half of our major risk.
Okay. You're getting ready to wrap it up now,
okay,
right?
third item is to improve the documentation. that is for raising the house, and so that was also mentioned on page 3 of the floodplain. The information that's provided that a property owner that wants to raise their house and get it out of the flood zone, it's very confusing, and there's a lot of issues related to height. Limitations. You can only raise your house, the roof can only be 15 feet high. Well, that's hard to do when the house roof is already at 18 to 20 feet, okay? So it's those types of incongruities that should be addressed and hopefully handled in documentation. The fourth item is there is another cause of flooding, and that is water main breakages. So for the third time in 12 and a half years, my property and garage have been flooded through a water main break.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Chair Bundy, if I may, I know that you and I spoke previously about Mr. Wolford's primary push there, which was updating the annual mailer that helps us with our community rating system. And I believe that the last we discussed, we decided that a future flood board meeting, we would agendize that. So RJ and I have taken notes. I have some other notes from Mr. Wolford on the same topic. So one thing I would say to you, Roy, is when we come back to this flood board, take a look, make sure those comments have been incorporated, and then I think the flood board themselves may have some further edits. So that mailer is going to go one round through the flood board before we send it out again. Just wanted to let everybody know that.
Would it be helpful if I sent the information that I just presented tonight to each one of you?
Well, if you were going to send it to Peter, he can forward it to all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, approval of meeting minutes, December 10th was our last meeting. Any corrections, changes? Move to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 I was absent, so I cannot validate
Oh,
the content.
okay,
Seconded and yes, approved.
okay.
Vote to approve.
Discussion items, capital improvement program, or do we want to adjust the agenda to not make Andre stay here any longer than necessary?
He'll be
We're just going
part
to have you for all evening.
He'll be part of the first item. Thanks, Chair Bundy. So we wanted to start off by talking about the 2-year capital improvement program. This will quickly dovetail into what Andre has been helping us with the last week, and we'll get into a discussion about some of the new information we've gathered from visiting numerous pump station sites. So one note here, we are moving to a 2-year CIP, when in years past it's been a 1-year. Just a real quick glimpse, you have this sheet in front of you, but we'll actually get into it further in the presentation. This is, I would say, a combination of things that the current Public Works staff has inherited, along with a couple adjustments that we've made through the course of the last year and a half. More recently, we've really tried to dive into this in more detail and really wrap our hands around kind of each of the items and see if there's any areas that maybe need a closer look, maybe any adjustments. And so that's where we reached out to Andre, who's with the Nichols Consulting Engineers, and started looking at numerous pump stations. Yes, sir.
May I ask questions along the way, or is it better to wait?
We'll get, if you have questions on this slide, feel free to ask them at any time. We will get into a more detailed discussion about this, though, at later in the presentation.
My question, and you can defer the answer, is that I don't understand what the 965 is. Is that this? It's not the addition of all those figures, is it? It doesn't seem to add up.
I should add up. I believe it does add up, but we can verify. It's
Okay.
it's meant to add up, but yeah, we'll
Okay.
revisit that. And then just one note here. So the items listed with CAP, Climate Adaptation Plan, are items that through previous flood board meetings we've mentioned that we realize their priorities, but we are just deferring them, so that we could get the climate adaptation plan further along before we can invest in those projects. Some of them have some large dollar amounts. So I'd like to introduce Andre Jedkowski of Nichols Consulting Engineers, formerly with Amen West, and I believe many of you are familiar with him and his work assisting us here in the town with flood control systems.
Good evening.
So I would say 3 to 4 weeks back, we contacted Andre and thought he'd be a great addition to our assessment group. We focused on the 6 flood control pump stations listed on the left. So Shorebird Marsh, High Canal, Lagoon 1, Marquardt Lagoon, Marina Village, and San Clemente. And we're going to go through kind of a slide-by-slide, station-by-station review of just what we learned in our one field visit, which was about a week ago. Real quickly, wanted to draw attention to the locations. The top left arrow is High Canal. Working down High Canal, you'll hit Marquardt Lagoon, and then Lagoon 1 is further south. And then to the east there, that's Shorebird Marsh pump station. And then also we've got Marina Village, top left, and then working down south, we have San Clemente pump station. So those are the 6 that we'll be discussing today. So if you like, Andre, you want to give a short kind of overview of your efforts and involvement, and then we can talk about Shorebird Marsh.
Okay, sure. So again, I was asked to assist in developing a scope for these 6 pump stations, and so we conducted a site visit on April 1st. It was for the morning of April 1st, and Peter, RJ, and your maintenance crew were out there. So we visited each one and made a notation, a written notation of some of the observations, that we came up with. Do you want me to touch on this list, or?
Sure. Why don't you can go through your list,
Okay.
and then I'll cover any missing pieces.
Okay, well, kind of the main thing is there's a deteriorated roof enclosure over the pump station that needs to be replaced. So for that scope, we will look at, again, a structural evaluation and then a structural design. In addition to that, we made a note that the condition of the concrete head walls and wing walls should be evaluated in more detail structurally because of deficiencies. And as this slide kind of points out, some of those deficiencies. And then your maintenance staff mentioned that, again, we have existing gates out there, one of them being a 60-inch slide gate, both on the base side as well as the marsh side, that need to be replaced. They were inquiring whether those gates could be automated, meaning have an electric actuator and then tied to a control panel. So that would need to be looked at too. That's if the town desired to, again, further, study that.
So the Shorebird marsh enclosure is not depicted. However, it's been on the CIP, so that's one that staff has been fully aware of. I guess some of these other ones, reason for bringing them up are they're kind of new items that hadn't made it onto the CIP, and we're just kind of taking a fresh look, trying to, make sure we capture everything that needs to be captured. And so that's where, Andre's been instrumental. Any questions on
Currently-
Shorebird Marsh?
Yeah, on Shorebird Marsh, is the tide gates, they have to be manually activated out there, or what's the situation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and so this proposal is to be able to do it from a control panel someplace else?
We're not at a point where we're proposing anything. I think it's certainly a wish list item that's worth, understanding the cost benefits of doing something like that.
Yeah, whether to automate it, meaning level controls and so forth, and even remote control, or at least remote monitoring.
Could I ask a question? That picture we're looking at, that's the Shorebird Marsh gates and all?
That's the outfall gate on the east side.
Okay, because I thought where the fellow with the orange jacket isn't that a motor of some sort with a shaft?
Right, it's just, again, we're looking at automating it, and I think that was the request.
Oh, okay, I
In fact,
thought I heard
all
it, as opposed to manual, meaning someone goes and pushes a start button?
Yeah,
I
versus.
got you.
Yeah,
I got you.
provide level controls.
So it's not like a man turning a wheel, it's a motor?
No,
Okay.
they have motors. And some of them do, some of them don't, as you'll see.
All right.
Any other questions about Shorebird? All right, moving on. So I'll kick this one off. Our maintenance team has noticed that the top of this discharge structure has been degraded, both the concrete and the grate. We visited on April 1st. Tides were too high. I went at low tide last Friday, tried to see it at a 1-foot elevation tide, and it still was not visible. But certainly we want to take a look at that and
Yeah, the top, I believe the top is at -4, so you would have to have a very low tide to actually see it.
Could you describe, Andre, the importance of that feature and?
Well, this is the discharge structure for the pump station on the High Canal side, and again, from memory, it's relatively large, and I'm going to say something on the order of 8 by 8 inside. And I apologize, I do. I have the dimensions in there if you're interested, I could get those. But anyway, so it discharges, all the pumps discharge into this box and then bubble out. So if it's submerged by the tide, you may not even see it. You may not even see the flow. You may see a disturbance on the surface. The lower the tide, the more of the bubble that you would see. Again, it's there to dissipate the energy from the pump. So it bubbles out through this grating, and the grating, again, is, as I recall, it was galvanized steel with some straps across it. And they have a shelf life, meaning the pump station, I believe, is approaching 25 years? 20 years? I think 20 years, maybe. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to recall each of them, but maybe on the order of about 20 years. So there's some maintenance to be done. And again, I don't know what
Thank you.
how deteriorated it is. I know that there's been other grates that have been replaced, one being at San Clemente, and that one's even older. I think that one's pushing 30 years. Similar bubbler there as well.
Yeah. The one on San Clemente, I've observed that many times because it's higher and you can really see it.
Right.
And the grate has, sort of broken the concrete because there's so much debris that gets in there and so much resistance from the pumping that, it sort of caused it to break apart on the concrete.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the case here. Again, we have a trash rack that's supposed to collect most of the larger debris. But if that is an issue, then that should certainly be addressed, meaning, and either that or going out there and, again, remove the grate at low tide and, clear that out. But I don't know what the maintenance plan is for these structures, meaning, but that's something to look at. And I don't know if that's the cause, by the way, Bob, too. Whether that or whether, the anchors, rusted and then, again, expanded within the concrete. That's a structural review.
Yeah, I've observed that there's a lot of debris that's sort of trapped in that grate for the San Clemente one.
Okay. And again, that has a trash rack too, so.
Great. Moving on. So this is Lagoon 1. This is the one of the stations that's less automated. You can see our maintenance crew who's using a power drill to turn the gates.
Yeah, so here, again, from what we understand, at Lagoon 1, the pumps are the original pumps. They're quite old. I know maintenance is being done on them and they're being serviced, but there is a life cycle to these, especially the motors. So I don't know how, if the motors have ever been replaced. It could be just the impellers, and again, constant maintenance. But my recollection is 20 years ago, they were quite old, and this is 20 years later. Back up, because we did somewhat of an evaluation, not so much of the pumps, but of the levels in the lagoons back in the year 2000. And I don't think the pumps have been replaced, from what I'm told. So that's one thing. So that's something to consider, whether at some point is to replace the pumps. With that, if you're going to replace the pumps, is to further study the hydrology and hydraulics of the lagoon, whether the pump should be upsized. It would behoove the town to at least look at that, not just replace what's out there, but look at other factors. Structural condition of the gates and pump station structure should also be evaluated. Again, quite an old structure, see where the defects are, not necessarily replace the structure, but to evaluate what repairs should be done.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
As far as the pump goes, have you or staff noticed any drop in efficiency of those pumps? You can check the performance, the actual performance versus the pump curve, so you can ascertain whether or not there's any problem with the impellers or the efficiency, and then you can compare that hydraulic power with the actual draw from the PG&E network and see
I don't
how
know
they're
if
working.
any of that was done.
I think that's really straightforward to do.
Yeah, I don't know that we've done that recently. Yeah.
Do you know if the town keeps a log of these motors and, you know, their age and you know, the efficiencies, et cetera?
Yeah, we did put a list together, and
Okay.
it's you know, something that we probably need to reach into some old documents to really iron it out completely.
Right.
But we've had also a lot of turnover in staff, so both on the maintenance side and the engineering side. So some of that information is deep in documents and file folders somewhere.
But if there are flow meters and pressure gauges, which I don't know, then
Yeah.
every time you turn them on, you get one or more points where they're working, and then you can compare with the curve, and then you can compare the actual
Mhm.
power consumption versus what the hydraulics say, and
Yeah, so I
give
think
you an
in-
idea.
what we're hearing, and I totally agree with you, I think the scope should include some sort of efficiency analysis of the system. Because, I mean, from my experience, when you have multiple motors working in a staged fashion, it might make sense to put in some variable speed drives as well.
That would need to be studied by an electrical consultant too, whether your controls can even handle that.
Right.
And also, you know, again, I'll leave it at that a electrical consultant should make those comments.
Andre, I had a
yeah,
question
sure.
just in regard to the need for the pumps and all of the pumps. My understanding was this was put in before the High Canal Pump Station was put in, which does a lot of the work now. And it's a relatively small watershed going to this lagoon. How often are these pumps used now? And has there ever been a necessity to, run more than one or two of them at a time, I guess, to pump water out?
To be honest, I don't know. That would be the town's maintenance crew that could probably give you that information. What I can tell you is back in 2000, we did, again, a lagoon study to, again, evaluate whether the water levels could be set a little bit higher, and compare that to your ordinance. And we did actually a flow test of running the pumps, both here at Lagoon 1 and at Marcotte Lagoon. And what our findings were that, again, the current policy is to in the anticipation of a storm during the winter condition, is to evacuate water down to a certain level, down to a lower level in the lagoons to, again, provide capacity for the storm. What we found is when we were doing our test, again, we were doing in conjunction with the 2 lagoons and High Canal Pump Station being turned on. Once you opened up the gates, it allowed the water go through, but then after a point, the water level in the High Canal and the water level in the lagoons became very close in elevation. So you basically didn't have a head to push that flow through, so you needed those pumps. And so what the point being is that it's great for evacuating the water prior to, but it's not great during a storm when you have a lot of flow coming down High Canal. You're not going to get a whole lot out by gravity. You're going to be utilizing those pumps more.
I think the
And that's
question-
true of both lagoons, by the
Yeah,
way. Yeah.
but the Marquardt Lagoon has a much smaller pump.
Yes.
And so, do we really need all of these pumps for a relatively small watershed when you're, trying to evacuate it down lower in a storm setting?
And again, this is just from memory, but I believe you do need quite a bit of capacity because, again, you're not going to utilize the gravity outfalls because of, again, what I just mentioned. You're not going to have a head differential to do that. So when you have flow coming into the lagoon during a severe storm, now I'm talking a severe storm, you need those pumps. Otherwise, the water will just keep on rising, and then you'll have flooding problems in the low-lying areas of your streets. Now, again, that wasn't we did not do an H&H, a hydraulics evaluation of your pumps back in 2000. That was not our scope. Our scope was looking at seeing if we could adjust your water levels by any considerable amount, again, during winter and summer conditions.
And to be clear, the current practice is for both lagoons to just typically to gravity feed it into High Canal and to use the High Canal pump station to pump it out. So I think the condition that Andre is talking about is a severe storm condition. So what we've noticed is we haven't really had a lot of flooding in these neighborhoods. Our current practice of going into what we call extreme winter mode, where we gravity feed both the lagoons into High Canal, we pump High Canal out, and we keep both the canals and both the lagoons at really low levels, because we typically have a number of days warning that we're going to get 3 to 5 inches of rain. That practice has worked really well. So I appreciate Board Member Garcia's astuteness in terms of, recommending that we do an efficiency study. I might recommend that, we may instead want to look what's up here, which is review the pump condition and sizing. These pumps are really old. They probably don't get the wear and tear, say, that High Canal or San Clemente does, because those are workhorses. They're working all the time. These pumps are used sparingly. It may be, in other words, it may be worthwhile, instead of putting your money into an efficiency study, to put it into a capacity one, and then maybe even some level of automation. So.
Because overall, the watershed for this area is not very big. Right?
It's not. Yeah, I mean, the watershed goes up a bit. We have the watershed maps. We can pull those out and show them to you. But yeah, this is a smaller watershed than what High Canal carries. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in our old storm drain master plan. You'll see the tributary area in there too.
And I think doing that analysis now is good information, because sometimes you don't have control over when a pump goes down. And so if you're in that position of should we repair or replace in kind, or maybe now we have this information that we need to upsize, so then we're not blindly just replacing or repairing the same size pump. We actually think about it and can upsize at that time.
And this kind of goes hand in hand with an observation that Peter's made over time too, and that is dredging. The need for dredging of the lagoons in general, right? Peter, that's something I don't know if that's budgeted, but it's certainly something to think about too, from a capacity standpoint, including flood control.
And that's a specific question that, before we wrap this item, we'd like the board's input on. It's in italics here at the bottom. Does the Flood Control Board want to add this item to the capital improvement program? We don't have anything in the 2 to 5 year CIP that says, hey, do a dredging analysis, seek environmental permits for dredging, get a cost estimate, or do the actual capital improvement of increasing our capacity. I do believe that one of the lagoons was dredged once, and so if you go back as long as he's been around, my guess is at least 50% of the capacity is gone due to siltation. So that's something that in terms of our long-term flood preparation, it seems worthwhile.
Yeah, my recollection is that it was probably 30 years ago or so, and it was a assessment district, evidently, and I thought it was sort of a 50-50 cost sharing between the residents and the town to dredge Marquardt Lagoon. And they couldn't get 50%, or they couldn't get enough votes for an assessment district for Lagoon 1, and so that didn't get dredged.
Another item that we could use your input on is these grates shown in the picture are not on the CIP to be replaced. Just happened to be out there while we were doing our gate maintenance, and so this is the water is at negative 3.6 elevation, so got a nice good look at it. And some of those grates are actually dangling. I was joking to Peter, kind of like wind chimes, so I think it'd be a good idea to add those if you're supportive.
The question that you have there for the flood control board is the whole thing or just the capacity of lagoon? What is the?
Yeah, that refers to the 2 points, the one that I made and the one that RJ made. So would you like to recommend adding the grates that need to be replaced as well as the dredging? Because neither of those are in the current CIP. So those would be new items. And that way when we came to council next month, they would see those and decide to allocate funds to them.
And there's one more slide.
It certainly looks like the gates need to be replaced, and then the issue of the dredging should be put out there to see if there's community interest, or is this something you thought the town was going to pay for completely?
Well, typically what we do, and this is a good question because it relates to the entire CIP, we put a cost estimate of what we think it would be to deliver one or multiple phases of that project. So you'll see we use the terms construction, planning, engineering. So we don't take an action as to who's paying the bill. Sometimes we get grants, sometimes we use sales tax money. That's a different question. Personally, I think it would be another cost sharing. In order to be effective, it would be a cost sharing program for the dredging. But I'm strictly speaking from the standpoint of improving our flood control system, right? So, I've heard all of you talk about, are we going to do something better? Are we going to improve efficiency? Are we going to replace in kind? Are we going to think long term? Well, if we're having that discussion about long term improvements, it certainly makes sense to me to increase capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
I agree.
yeah.
So this is just a photo showing of what the lagoon looks like at that elevation. All right, moving on. What are you?
As you pointed out, this Marquardt Lagoon has a very small pump station. And again, I'm speaking out of my recollection of relative sizes. I think the relative size of this pump has a capacity of like 2.6 CFS, where Lagoon number 1 was on the order of 45 CFS. So quite a big difference. And this only has one pump in it as well. So again, you are able to get out what I would call evacuate out by gravity in that, again, with forecasting a storm, but then after, again, the water level equalizes, you're at the mercy of this small 2.6 CFS pump. So
But my understanding is that, they've done such a good job of planning for this, that this pump has very few hours on it.
Again, you would have to get the records from maintenance. I have no knowledge of that, so. But it's, again, very old pump. With proper maintenance, sure, you could, it will run for a while, but, again, the things that you probably don't replace is the motor itself. And once you start replacing the motor, you start replacing the pump. So it has a life cycle. That's all I could tell you. They do have life cycles. So again, old structure, you would want to evaluate the structure. If you got a bigger pump, it would probably require a larger wet well. Generally, that goes hand in hand, so you'd probably be replacing the structure. On the other side, which is the one on the Marquette Lagoon side, I think there's some serious structural problems there, both to the head wall, to the support for the platform, and to the gate itself. And it's stucco, partially, or I guess fully, I guess. So it's, should be replaced.
And then lastly, on the right, you can see the corroded steel platform. It's definitely, for safety reasons, would need to be looked at and at least band-aided, if not repaired, rather soon.
Okay, with Marina Village, I guess similar issues. Here, concrete wing walls have cracks behind them. The soil to the back of the wing walls have also eroded away, meaning some of the support behind the wing walls have eroded. I think there was a water break. Is that the one that? I think one of your maintenance folks reported there was a water break and it washed out some of the backfill behind the wing walls.
Yeah, the manifold sort of broke, or the connection broke, and that
And then
had to
tore
be
down.
fully
Right.
replaced, and there was a lot of erosion with that, yes.
Right. The deteriorated trash rack, which is hanging, and as you could see in that position, I guess there's a plan to be replaced, and I think it's already in your planning as we speak. So that I don't think any further planning needs to be done for that. Again, we didn't hear of any real issues with the pumps themselves. Other than, again, if you replaced it, you'd want to look at, again, hydraulics of it, in combination maybe with dredging the marsh itself, the lagoon itself in front, to see because the capacity of these types of pump stations works hand in hand with the capacity of the lagoon, because you route that flow through the lagoon, which analyzes how big those pumps need to be. And that has not been done as far as I'm aware.
Andre, this would be a great opportunity to see if you could explain to me how this pump station works. Because I understand that it can, under certain circumstances, pump water into the lagoon, and in other circumstances, it's pumping it out into Shorebird Marsh or the Shorebird and Marsh Channel. This is what had been explained to me in the past, and I have never understood it.
Unfortunately, this is one pump stations that we really haven't studied before, and meaning the details of how the true operations of this pump station. But all I could tell you is I'm not aware of, generally inflow and outflow, the pumps generally pump out, out from the lagoon, out to the canal, the canal that goes out to Shorebird. The inflow would really be by gates. You'd open up a gate and allow the inflow in. So I'm not familiar with this acting in both directions or what mechanism. So Bob, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I never understood it.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that scenario.
So, yeah, it may have been that
You open
it
up a
was
gate.
used as a detention pond by opening the gates so that water from, I don't know, the west side of 101 that didn't go to the San Clemente pump station could use that as a detention basin. I don't
Well,
know.
I do know one thing is that, all of the flow from Marina Village ends up in this pond, right? I mean, it flows out to the end of the streets out at Harbor and Canal and the other streets there and Echo, and they flow out into this area, and then it gets lifted up here and goes into the canal that goes out to Shorebird. There is a gate that was mentioned by, again, your maintenance staff that is also having severe problems just east of the pump station. It's somewhere in the levee system here, and you're probably familiar with it, Bob.
Yeah.
But it's having severe problems. It needs to be looked at.
My understanding from Kevin Kramer was that, that was supposed to allow water to come in to create wetlands in there as then it drained into the reservoir, and that they never could figure out a way to manage it. And what Kevin, I think, told me was they just had it opened enough that there's a certain amount of water that comes through. It really doesn't. We really don't have wetlands where that is, except where the flow of water is going along there. But I don't think
it's
that's
stuck.
ever been
From
worked
what I
out.
understand, it may be partially stuck. Is that?
My understanding, it's cracked, but on purpose, and that's
Yeah.
where it
Right.
stays.
Yeah.
So.
But then it freezes up. With no inaction, your gates will freeze up.
But, I mean, the only role of that gate is to allow some water to create more of a wetland there and have some flow through there all year.
So again, I don't know, the need for either improving it or leaving it the way it is. That's something to be evaluated.
Yeah.
Our last stop was at the San Clemente pump station, and overall it's functioning pretty well. But we did notice some structural cracking that was worth looking into further.
And again, it looks like there's a contribution of the actual manifold has settled over the last 30 years. So you do have some exterior cracking, and again, whether that could be chipped off and patched, that would need to be reviewed. It
Yeah.
doesn't look from on the wall. It doesn't look like it's reflecting on the other side, meaning on the interior wall.
And Andre's referring to, if you look at the right of the screen, the right side being the part that's settling, and then that large pipe kind of rotating and possibly causing
So-
cracking.
My recollection of this site is, again, this is put on fill. There was a certain amount of fill. It was surcharged, as I recall, meaning there was and I think the street and this portion was surcharged by a developer that, again, old history, you'd have to check me on the facts, but again, 30-plus years ago, he surcharged the area. He thought it was adequate to condense the soil underneath. And again, a certain foundation was put under for the pipe support, and it looks like it kept on settling.
So that, I was going to say that manifold also was replaced
Right.
about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah,
6 or
and that
7
was
years
due
ago.
to the cathodic protection.
Yeah.
The cathodic protection ran out, meaning there was cathodic protection there, but it was never replaced, and eventually you get holes in the pipe.
Yeah.
Especially
That project
still.
and the Marina Village pump station manifold project sucked up all the floodboard money for several years, and nothing else got done.
So, and I don't, again, I wasn't party to the design or installation of that replacement of that portion of manifold, but I do know it was put in by, I think it was Team Gelati back then, if I'm not mistaken. But again, a structural review should be made of this, and then corrective action should be called for. I don't think it would be difficult to re-support this manifold because of what's underneath, meaning the bay mud as well, much further down. But that's an opinion. That's an opinion, not fact.
Did you look at the outfall for this pump station?
I did not know. We only looked at this one issue here.
Yeah, that's the one that I was referring to, that they patched that up a couple of times and put new straps on, and
How's it look now, Bob?
I think it's holding up.
So it sounds like, my guess is it's probably similar what's going on at the other one.
Yeah.
But again, I would recommend that, again, if there's debris getting trapped, is to assess what that is and have a maintenance program to remove that debris.
The elevation of that is probably at 5 or 5.5 feet.
You're right, it's quite a bit
More
different,
visible,
yeah. Right.
Okay, moving on here. So this is kind of the point where we can open it up and talk about any of the pump stations and the overall CIP. The page in front of you is the more legible version of what's on the screen. We've highlighted the items that we think are going to at least wait for some of the climate adaptation plan on the right with the CAP in red, and then a couple of items that may be modified or adjusted depending on how an assessment would go, and if we get support from you all to move forward with something like that, and then as we gain information, we may modify some of the other items that are on there. But down at the bottom, the big one is, are you supportive of furthering this kind of analysis and assessment of our pump stations, and want to get some feedback from you on that, based on what you've seen here from these slides.
So can I, so I think that 965 number, by the way, I think that it's not considering the 150 that is at the bottom.
Okay, great. Thanks for pointing that out.
And what is the number above that is $14 million? What is that?
16 million. That's the Marina Village levee improvements and tidal barrier, and that's kind of a big approximate.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I mean the one above 965. You see above 965, there's 14 million.
oh, I believe that's carryover from a previous page. So
It's actually the sum of all of our capital improvements for those given periods. So if you look at 2019 and 2020, you're only now looking at flood control and storm drainage, but we also have a bunch of other tabs that we don't ask you to review, and you'll probably thank us for that. Things like transportation, town-owned facilities, all those other things. So this top line out of all the pages is so when we go through it from a finance standpoint, we know what our overall ask is.
So it's worthwhile when you show this to us to eliminate that, so it's not confusing
yeah,
for the people. Can I ask another question regarding planning, environmental engineering, and construction? If one project may have all of those components. It doesn't seem that is the case. But what happens if there's one that only includes construction? Does that mean that there's no need or that it has already occurred, the planning, engineering, and environmental?
Yeah, it could be either.
It could be either. That.
Yeah, right. So we've got the item 11, the Marquardt Lagoon inside gate. That's kind of ready to go. It doesn't
Okay.
require a lot of design and engineering.
And then similarly, if there's something that, for instance, item 12 that says engineering, that assumes that the previous step, planning, has already occurred or is not needed, but it also means that there's a forthcoming construction component that is not included.
Correct. Or that it's beyond the 5-year scope. So we're looking at the money we're going to need, first of all, to budget in the next 2 years. And then the 3 years is unbudgeted, but it's like an estimate of what we think could be invested in that particular project. And then in your particular example, which is a good one for number 12, we don't have a construction estimate in the next 5 years for that project.
Right. Yep.
Comments, gentlemen? Dave?
First question. So all the information we just saw, I saw you presented information on Lagoon 1, Shorebird Marsh. That is separate in addition to items 3 and 4, 9 and 10, et cetera? Okay.
Yes, there are several items that are not captured here that we discovered through that walk.
So all the information just presented is basically captured in 3 and as needed? Okay.
And has the staff ranked these projects according to your understanding of the some sort of sorting criteria? I mean, priority criteria based on, when you have staff available to do the work, or urgency, or some sort of basis for prioritizing these projects, if you have any. And if you have, do you order this, or is this an all or nothing package? That's what you had to do.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding it completely, but we are trying to take a closer look at the items that we want to deliver in the next 2 years. And so the items that you do see a dollar amount there, we are giving that some thought as to staffing and deliverability. Doesn't mean we're going to do 100%, but we're going to try to deliver the bulk of those items in the 2 years. The ones that are further out, obviously they're further out for a reason. It's hard to really have a complete, detailed game plan at this point in time. So they're out 3 years plus.
So within these 2 years, there's no one particular project that is more urgent than others.
I hear you.
And if there is, as far as your request to the board, it's not pertinent to ask us to address the schedule. It's just
Yeah, I think that's helpful because typically, I've gone through this with multiple jurisdictions, and you give things rankings and priorities, and then a pump fails, and it doesn't matter what your spreadsheet said. You go and you fix that station, right? So we're not attempting to put these in rank order. We have a pretty good handle. We deal with the maintenance crew. We find out. I think it's better for us day to day in the weeds to determine, which ones we should deliver the most quickly. I think what we're looking for from the board today, and I'm going to have to leave pretty soon, but you're in capable hands with RJ. What we're looking for from the board is adding projects that don't exist. So we went over this slideshow, and there are a number of projects that aren't in the CIP. So it'd be great to hear from you. Yeah. Replacing the grates at Lagoon 1, that's important. That's not on here. Let's add that. Same thing with Marina Village head wall, wing wall, and assess the gate there. That's not a capital improvement, So if you're on the flipboard, you say, yeah, I think those should be added to the list. We can add them. This is your chance to kind of shape, add the projects that aren't there. And I think, the only other thing we would ask is of the existing projects, are we missing something here that about? Is there some level of project description that's incomplete? Let us know about that. I think the last thing I'll say about it is, RJ's final point, item number 3, which makes sense if we just added this and we didn't carry the summation, I could see why that's excluded. But one of the ways to go about this is through a flood control system assessment, number 3, an as-needed project. So Andre kind of did what one person can do in a week, walk around, look at it, give us some bullet lists. He did a preliminary assessment of a handful of stations, and I think this study speaks to maybe a more in-depth look at that, which Board Member Garcia, that particular study should make some recommendations about priority, right? If you're going to do a town-wide flood control assessment study, that should say, hey, you know what? In the next 2 years, these are must-dos, and then here's your wish list for 3 to 10 years. And I know RJ is a fan of instead of going at things piecemeal, right, and just putting out fires when they come up, he's asked the question since he's come on board, do we have a viable, long-range, well-thought-out engineering study that tells us, gives us a recommendation?
I think it really comes into play, especially when you have to deal with permits. You're there at a pump station, you're getting resource permits, doesn't it make sense to capture everything that's necessary at that pump station for the next, 3 to 10 years while you're there and doing all that effort? And so that's where, for me, it makes sense, versus missing an opportunity. We do 2 items and realize the next year we're back there trying to figure out how to replace 2 more.
Keith?
I like your thinking a lot. I think it's a great idea to think ahead and try to do this in a real comprehensive fashion. So if we're being asked to, support this as-needed project number 3, I think that sounds like a good idea. I was, curious to hear about the cathodic protection problem that, was missed, it seems like. If the cathodic protection material was not being replaced and then the pipe was failing as a result of that, it seems like there ought to be some, maintenance around that. I see there's an item on here, number 8, a cathodic protection program. Shouldn't that be for like everything, or is it just for the ones that are identified here with? Because I just heard about San Clemente Pump not having its cathodic protection equipment, maintained, and therefore the pipe had to, or the headworks or whatever had to be replaced. So it's like
and that's part of where this assessment could assist.
Yep.
Given our workload and staffing, we just don't have the capacity to dive into all those details on all of these items.
Yep.
So we really need to bring in someone else to kind of help and really look into specifics on those items.
So once again, I'm sorry, I don't think I fully understand. Projects number 1 through 12 are currently planned part of the CIP. Is that correct? And you're saying what you presented here, based on the brief condition assessment that you did on that, is there anything from the slides that we think that should be added? Is that the question?
It's one of the questions. Yeah, it's definitely a question.
What we saw on the slides,
Yeah.
you're asking if any of those should be added here.
Yeah, and there's a handful of them, right? Should we do dredging? Should we do a dredging study? There's a list of them. Yeah, they're not on here.
Right,
So-
but are there any dollars associated with those? If they come in, any of these need to go out?
No,
there
this
money
is
for
not.
anything?
This is not a what we call a financially constricted document.
Okay.
This is a planning document and a vision and a budgeting document. So, right now we don't have a problem with fiscal capacity. We have a problem with staffing and engineering capacity. So I don't see, we if you all recall, we sunset the flood tax, right? And that generated around $670,000, and we replaced it with a sales tax that generates more than that. And right now, the 2-year total is only $1 million. So we have more capacity financially to deliver. But yeah, so in my opinion, it's helpful to include those things in the CIP. There's a list we went through, and I think RJ has a good handle on them. So we don't need you to go through every single one and say, I would just say no if there's something you really don't want us to include. Otherwise, a lot of the suggestions we made about, the 2 lagoons and and Marina Village head wall and wing wall and replacing grates, those seem to me fairly logical to put in.
Yeah, those I would argue that those more than CIP, those are more R&R type of projects, renewal and replacement. You see something that is about to collapse or that is, looks like it's failing structurally, I would say go ahead and include those.
Right. So
right before
I think
it happens, instead of.
Yeah, the corroded grates, R&R, that makes sense. And there's even an opportunity if we go in there for a larger project to be able to salvage and reuse those. So those are the things that we would be able to, work into our work plan fairly easily in the next couple of years.
So I would say that any of those kind of preventative maintenance
Right.
projects that I would consider R&R type of projects,
Yeah.
I would encourage that based on your own expertise and the judgment that you include those in these expenses.
And some of the inoperable gates and those things, I think, would be further assessed in this item 3 at the bottom, this townwide assessment, and we would have more of a dialogue and detailed discussion before we move forward with big ticket items.
Exactly, I totally agree with that. I think that for the more long-term CIP improvements, as far as changing capacity, I think that is worthwhile to have a system-wide analysis so that you can see if there's a lifeline that you need to focus on, as opposed to, as someone has said, go to different multiple assets that may be as important as each of those are, maybe unrelated to each other, or we don't know, or you may not know how they kind of relate to ensure a minimum level of service for what we intend to do, and then you can include in there whatever analysis you have, if the motors need to be replaced or just rewind, or maybe they're working, I don't know.
One way to handle that would be to add a new item which speaks to, basic maintenance and upkeep, or R&R, whatever term you want to use. I think it's helpful. I agree with you. It's not a purely capital improvement. We're not investing in new infrastructure, and you know what I mean. But we don't use, in the little town of Corte Madera, we use the CIP to mean a lot of things,
Okay.
and one of it is to allocate dollars. So the nice thing about this item that's before you is that this is a chance to have input on how the town invests in the future. So the CIP feeds the budget, right? So we budget the first 2 years. The out 3 years we don't budget. Right? They're not part of our checks and balances and ledger on the accounting side. And then the other thing that happens is we fund those projects in specific accounts. So that way, and RJ does this all the time with the projects he manages, he goes to the budget sheet and has a specific account number, and the way we get to that is having it listed in the CIP, and that creates a budget line item, and then that creates an account that we can bill to do the planning work, or to do the engineering work, or to do the construction work. I agree that there's a difference between a pure capital improvement and just maintaining your system at a basic level. It makes sense to add, system maintenance for grates and gates and whatever else, and then have it be a catch-all. And in the project description, you can list 4 or 5 of the examples of the things we know to do, and then just say, comma, et cetera. I'm seeing some nodding heads, so we can add, that, and that would be a way to capture it and separate it out from more true improvements.
I think it's a good idea.
So we're going to make an attempt to update this. We'll have an opportunity to share this one more time with you all and get some more feedback. And we can try to incorporate, some of the other things we have on the slide, the kind of basic maintenance repair items.
David.
So as far as a wish list, since we can throw anything in, I've always been curious about the generator at the Marina Village pump station. It seems to be temporary. It's on a trailer. Is it meant to be that way? Can it be further hidden or made permanent? Just maybe look at that generator, please. And second, I don't see on here anything, but I see it on our agenda about Highway 101 flooding. So I assume we don't have to pay for that with our CIP. Understood.
So just one response on the generator. So there are different requirements for a permanent and a temporary generator. And so if you did want one, we can find a better location at that area, but to put a permanent one somewhere would probably involve a new generator.
Understood. Yeah, there's mobile versus stationary, right?
So, RJ, one of my thoughts, and I guess I still don't have a good feel about what is really needed at Lagoon 1 and Marquardt Lagoon in regard to pumping capacity. I do like the idea of considering, dredging and see if there's interest in the citizens that are there to contribute to that or work on that, since it does provide, some amenities for them and sort of enhances their view of the lagoon and ability to use the lagoon. But it seems like we should get Andre to take a fresh look at Lagoon 1 and Marquardt Lagoon, looking at the watershed, looking at the use of the pumps over the years in regard to how much they've had to be used. Has there been any concerns about water levels getting too high in a storm situation and not being able to keep up? The High Canal Pump Station just does so much and really can, move water to, keep the flooding from that large watershed. Can we, just take a fresh look at that? Because I think Andre points out these pumps are all old, they're worn out, they're inefficient, old pumps and probably high energy users. But let's see what the real requirement is, and then what the interest on, dredging can be. And then, if we dredge, then we can take the spoils and put them on the levee and start building the levee up as a good long-term plan there. The Marina Village pump station, I've never seen that pond very full, even with, heavy rain. So I think it's, the watershed isn't too great. I think it's able to keep up. We probably do need to look at what's the rationale and, what's needed for that little inflow pump from San Clemente, not pump, but the inflow channel from San Clemente Creek that then winds its way, to the detention pond. And I think they cracked that open 20 years ago or whatever, and that's the way it's been since then. They have not done anything with it since then. I don't know. Does it have a pump there?
I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's something coming out, but I don't know.
No,
if
it's a
really
gate.
pump. That's just
I
a
live
gate.
over there, yeah. I
That's
know
just
what
a
you're
gate.
talking about, this little channel that just winds its way around
Yeah.
the back of the subdivision there, and it just comes and goes with the tide through a gate.
And I think I was told that it had something to do with sort of maintaining a wetland environment there, but it doesn't really do that. They're just there's a little stream, and then there are a bunch of invasive species and things like that. So, my sense is that the detention pond there may be, more than adequate to take care of the water that comes in, and the pumps capable of getting it out to the Shorebird Marsh Channel. Going back to the tidal barrier levee upgrade, I know we want the climate adaptive plan to address some of that, but I think it's clear that that's the one thing that, should be or will be in the climate adaptive plan, is some way to maintain this levee, which protects all of Corte Madera in the flood zone west of that existing levee. And I think we also need to work with the county and Larkspur to continue it down to, be able to protect Larkspur and the county properties that really do flood at high tides and when Corte Madera Creek is really running high. But trying to have some plans so that if material was available, we could make use of that and put it on the levees where it doesn't impact the wetlands, but mostly along that north-south part. The part that protects Marina Village is more difficult because it's got wetland vegetation on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the climate adaptation plan, hopefully we'll have enough scientific analysis to at least have a scope to where we can apply for grants for some of these projects. And we're hoping to get that completed by the end of 2020, which, just before you know it, it's going to be
Yep.
here. So,
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, great. Thank you. Nice seeing you
Thanks, Andre.
again. Nice
Thank you.
have you come back and look over some of these things again, and,
RJ and I will be talking, and we'll develop a more detailed scope of what the town wishes for us to do.
okay,
And it will cost, we'll give you
yeah,
Thank you so much.
okay.
Thank you.
Great seeing you
Thank you,
again.
Andre.
Okay. Possible action to reduce the flood board from 7 to 5 members. Well, we've got it at 6 now. When Eli moved on to the council, we just left it at 6 at this point. And if somebody else steps down at some point, then we could, decide. I don't know if Stephanie is, what her plans are. She had, talked about stepping down. She's been probably one of the longest serving member, I think, of the flood board.
Yeah, and we'd be recommending that it be done through attrition, not voting someone off the island.
Yeah.
But definitely want to just kind of get your feedback, continue the conversation. We've had, I think, definitely this last round of quorum checks, and I think maybe in the previous one we had, kind of some last minute people join, which gave us a quorum, but it's kind of been a little touch and go the last few meetings.
Okay.
So my observations would be, first, I don't know if we can have 6 members in the long term just because it's an even number. So I don't know if our own bylaws or incorporation documents or whatever was the basis for the formation of the board allows an even number of board members, just in case that there would be some sort of voting impasse. And the other thing is that I don't know if reducing from 7 to 5 is up to staff or even the board, or if it was mandated by the proposition that was the basis for.
Right. So we would do all that fact checking and make sure that it's all done above water and properly. And if that means going to council and revising something, we would do that.
Yeah,
at that
because
time.
it may not be up to us.
Yeah.
I think because it's an advisory board, we're okay with 6, and we've got 6 members that have either a lot of history, a lot of understanding of it, or a lot of expertise. This is, I've been on the board for a number of years, and this is the most impressive board from the standpoint of, really having some technically knowledgeable people, and I appreciate that.
Great. So I was just hearing that some, for the most part, supportive in moving to 5 through attrition.
I would be okay with that.
Okay with me.
Great.
Okay.
Would it depend on this next phase of reappointments,
Excuse me. Would it?
where 3 of us are up for reappointment and there may be more interest?
Yeah, I'd have to. Yeah, like I said, we're not trying to kick anyone off, but yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that exactly.
I'd just say we wait until after, this month in May, when interviews will be conducted for reappointment.
Okay.
Yeah, I had thought in the past that, if you had someone that really had exceptional knowledge, exceptional background, expertise, that would be good to add to it. But, probably going with the 5 is easier for you and Peter, and maybe a little bit, then we just need 3 for a quorum. So, you okay with that?
Yeah, again, my only observation is that just to make sure that it can be done, that it's not in violation of whatever language formed the board in the first place.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think originally there may have been 9 members. Okay. King Tide observations.
Right. So we were planning on discussing this at the last meeting, which we got postponed, I think it was February, and you may have seen I kind of did a write-up via email, and there was some back and forth, so we discussed it. But since this is the first opportunity, we've had a flood board meeting since this, we figured I'd kind of just show you with some pictures about what we observed. So purpose was obviously to see the flooding for ourselves. We also wanted to check, if the check valve we thought was properly functioning, and just really understand the magnitude of the issues, in particular at ebb tide and golden tide. We set up a rudimentary reference system. We took measurements below one of the catch basins into the catch basin to measure the water level. We cross-referenced that to another reference point on the outside of the property nearest the bay, and we were able to kind of make those elevations match. Here's the results of this of that experiment. You can see, so the king tide was at 1220, and it was a 6.8. To my knowledge, that was pretty accurate. There wasn't a storm surcharge, and so a lot of the assumptions on these elevations are based on setting that number at 6.8 at 1220 and then correcting all the numbers backwards. Worth noting, so where it says RP, that stands for reference point, CB is catch basin. Some things we noticed, so the manhole just above, right in the pump station, started leaking right around 6.1 tide. That was kind of the first sign of anything. As tides grew, you could kind of see the water trying to work its way along the sides of the properties adjacent to the pump station. And then eventually it crested and worked its way over the property to the north, number 287. And that was right at the 6.8 tide, so right around 1220. So let me go back here for a minute to talk about the check valve. If I go to the table. So you can see based on the elevations, see the two blue columns, the difference between the catch basin side, which should be lower, and the tide side is relatively low. It's I think at most a 1.5 feet, and that's a relatively small volume in that storm drain system. So to me, that says that the check valve is for the most part operating. I mean, I think it's probably unrealistic for a check valve in a brackish, silty environment to seal things out 100%. And so if there's a small leak, I think that's to be expected. And so for it to have, the full head of the tide on one side and then, still maintain a lower value on the other side suggests that it was working to me. So what else we learned here? The tide crested over private property around a 6.8 tide. The other conclusion we drew was that in this particular scenario, there was no rainfall, and so I would expect that if you didn't have a rain event, if you did have a rain event and the tide was at 6.8 or higher, if the water is observed in the roadway when the tide is less than 6.8, it's likely due to rainfall unable to drain to the bay, not misfunction of the check valve.
What's the elevation of the catch basin at the roadway there?
So these are not, we didn't survey this, we were just keeping them relative to each other. So I don't know the answer to that question.
So, I mean, because the catch basin is settled so much, that is low there, so that, even if the check valve is only sort of maintaining 1.5 to the good, keeping it from getting up to the full 6.8, but it's still, flooding in the street as a result of the leakage leakage from whatever the leakage is coming from, whether it's the catch basin or just, the valve isn't, totally keeping it out as, we suspect. So because I've observed, water in that catch basin in the street, I think, on lower tides than a 6.8. It gets up in Mike Vogel's drive and, towards his garage. I don't know at what level it gets in the garage. But probably over 6.6, 6.8.
Right. Yeah, I've just been here and heard of flooding in the roadway at times where it's above 6.8 and times are below, and I would say the ones that are below are attributed to rainfall. I'd be surprised if it was flooding in the roadway at a lower tide than at 6.8. And that's because the water can't work its way out.
Yeah, certainly the rainfall contributes to that. I guess I would have thought from my observations that the tide that was causing significant flooding in the road was below 6.8, but that's good that you measured that and got the exact measurements on it.
It's not an extensive storm drain system. I believe it crosses the road and then maybe goes a couple hundred feet one way or the other, and then that's it. So it's not as if it has a lot of capacity in the storm drain to really take on additional rainwater.
Yeah,
So it's going to fill up pretty quickly.
yeah.
And then the other thing, just mentioned, we do have the pump station plans, 100% design, and just waiting on some feedback or results from the climate plan before we move that forward.
One of the things that I had thought about and maybe look at when you're out checking that area out, if the slot drains were continued up from the Cove School or K Passage pump station to link in to that pump station, that might, carry off a lot of the water that accumulates in rainfall and, get it out faster in flooding. We're asking the pump station to take on another watershed, but there's a good deal of capacity in that pump station at the Cove School.
Okay. Any other questions on this item?
And do we want to try to encourage the neighbors to do some berming or, create some, berm on their property that would keep it from coming between the pump station and their houses?
I would leave that up to each private property owner.
Okay.
I don't know that we can sponsor anything of that nature. Certainly, once we have results of a larger plan, we can get behind it and figure out how best to implement something like that. I think it's going to be, rather large in magnitude.
Yeah, I think this would potentially help in the short run if people did that, because, in my end of the neighborhood, people have done that and, have kept the water from coming between the houses. But, we haven't had the trouble with the catch basins, and now there's a check valve in that catch basin that seems to be working and keeping it out of the street.
Great.
But if the neighbors did try to get together, the town could, add a barrier to the back wall of the pump station on the concrete pad.
I mean, possibly as part of that kind of
Yeah.
plan we're talking about in
Yeah.
several years.
Yeah,
But
because it spills over the back of the pump station at about a 7.1, 7.2. So if the neighbors actually got together and did something, the town would need to do something, and that could be pretty simple, just putting concrete blocks. At one time, I think Kevin Kramer had sandbags all across the back, but the neighbors didn't really connect in with that.
gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, moving on. So just a report on the Highway 101 off-ramp ponding repairs. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with this item here. As you exit 101 heading northbound and you get off at Tamalpais. The pond, I measured it several times, and it was about 3.5-inch depth prior to us doing some work out there. You can see it from another angle here. Also, there's a small opening right next to that concrete barrier that's supposed to be handling all the water that ponds up there, and you could see it, just barely any water was coming through, and it was raining pretty heavily, and it was just pretty obvious that it wasn't keeping up. Plus, the cars go through it, and it sloshes the water around and makes that opening even less effective. Just by taking a level out there, we also noticed that the low point is actually 10 or 15 feet down from that opening.
That was the difference, yeah.
Yeah, so if you measure, if it were still and it wasn't moving around, you'd have a 1/2 inch of depth at the opening, and then you go to the low spot, and it's like 3.5 inches. So our goal was just to significantly improve the ponding and safety, create a simple design that could be implemented without lengthy delays, obtain Caltrans approval, and then as part of the construction, minimize impacts to vehicular traffic and minimize costs. So this is the concept that we developed. It was basically shaving down the existing curb as opposed to removing and replacing it. This allowed us to go in there one day and get the job done. Caltrans partnered with us and provided traffic control. And because it was a relatively simple fix, they were able to give us kind of the approval on the spot as opposed to working through numerous iterations of encroachment permits and all that stuff. So yeah, basically taking the slope of the gutter pan, removing the curb, so you have about a 5% slope back, and then clearing some of the dirt there behind the curb so that it could actually flow off the new gutter. So overall, I think it's about 15 feet in length opening now compared to before it was, 6 to 12 inches.
Less than that, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like in the middle, 6, and then at the widest part of that little U opening, maybe 12 or 15. So just some points on each of those goals there. From what I've observed, the ponding depth is actually reduced to about a 1/2 inch. I'm sure if it was raining, maybe it might get a little higher. Or heavy rain. I was out there in a light rain. Didn't require demolition, striping, repaving, and thus the process was a lot simpler, and allowed us to get the approval on the spot from Caltrans. It was done in about 6 hours. We had 2 kind of specialized concrete shaving guys both going at it to get it done in one day. And then the total cost was about $4,000,
Wow.
plus Caltrans' traffic control.
Yeah.
So,
Great work.
yeah, thank you.
Nicely done. I
Great.
mean, I noticed it immediately because, we've had a wet winter and no significant problems with the small amount of water that's out there now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Excellent.
There it is. Final
Yeah.
result.
And someone dug a trench, too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So just cleared enough area so that the water actually gets off of it and doesn't get trapped at a second spot.
Any thoughts for the 101 entrance from Tamalpais Redwood going north? Where it ponds up along Macy's?
As you're accessing onto the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't had a chance to fully dive into that one. That one, I have a feeling, is not going to be a simple fix, and thus would go through the full channel of approvals. And it's just a matter of, even this one, it's on the Caltrans right away.
Yeah.
So we came in using some of our own resources and funds to get that done, and then for something, on the on-ramp, is that the same? Do we want to do the same thing?
It could be that working off it with backhoe, just getting some trenching out, although you have to move the material someplace, so there'd be some traffic control. But be able to pick up that ponding area so that it drains down to the, existing culverts and catch basins to the east, and, that then get into Shorebird Marsh. Take a look at it, see what you
Okay,
think.
we'll take a look at it.
I always think things are simpler than they really are, but
First, I would like to agree with Dr. Bandier. Great job and congratulations on getting this done. It's we talked about it for several meetings, and it's great that it finally happened. And I know that it's not as simple as it looks. There's a lot of work behind. So thank you and congratulations on that. I would encourage that, based on this experience, that we somehow reach out to Caltrans, acknowledging and thanking them for their support, but also pushing them that in a nice, polite way, that maybe they should take ownership of the one further north on the on-ramp entrance. Just to start the dialogue. Thank you for letting us fix that. We thought it was a
Good
a
experience.
safety concern.
Yep.
We would kindly like you to remind you that we have a similar issue further north that we believe you should look at. So put it on their plate.
Right.
And see what happens.
Yeah, we've definitely thanked them, so we're trying to get some goodwill there, and then I'll take a look at it, and we'll see if there's a simple fix that we could recommend, down the line. I don't know how much more rain we're going to get this season.
Right, no, it's for the future,
Yeah.
but again, it may be the responsibility. So it's great that for $4,000 we were able to do it. I think
Yeah.
that was, perfect. But maybe we should start with, hey, you gotta fix that.
Yeah. Yeah.
the other thing I might ask Caltrans about, or if you can observe, whether the slot drains that our Caltrans had put in, which are south of this fix, about 50 yards or so, they look pretty clogged up when I looked at them just over the fence. I mean, it looked like they must have some poor drainage into those, just because they're slot drains and nothing's been done to keep them open. And I also noticed that on some of the drains that are on the overpass. Maybe it's not too, significant because the water sort of sheets off and goes someplace else, but there's some drains on the overpass that are just totally clogged up.
It wouldn't surprise me. I met all three of their maintenance crew workers that are dedicated to Marin, Sonoma, and possibly another county. They have 3 guys.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for the work on that. Future agenda items? Yes.
All right, so bear with me. In light of discussion today and the new flood control tax, I'll ask for your permission first to, again, dust off the charter or the statement of purpose, so that it may talk about the size, and maybe we can expand it to be more of sea level rise focus to this board as an idea. Ask staff to ensure the flood board were communicating with the County Marin sea level rise projects. And also, in light of the public's input today to the newsletter, let's as a board look into how we can provide information to those that might want to raise their house, getting an elevation certificate or finding the right mechanism through the town. And last, in light of Ramon's talk about Caltrans, just keep us informed, because I believe the town council is also in communication with Caltrans about the fencing on the east side of 101
Right.
between the mall and Warnham.
Yeah, Peter was telling me at an earlier meeting that, he's been in contact with them. I don't know if you or, but Peter's been in contact. He thought that was supposed to have gotten, fixed by now. He was going to follow up on it.
That's all I have for future agenda items. Thanks.
So the climate adaptive plan that RJ and Peter put together with, and got this grant to do that, at the preliminary meeting, people from the county were here, people from, Larkspur representatives here. So really, it was pulling together everybody. Chris Chu, who's the leading things for the county, was here at that meeting. So
Yeah, and I
people are-
provided an update to about 100 people at a sea level rise workshop a few weeks ago, and so told them about our plan, and so
Excuse me.
they're aware of it and they're excited about it, and we plan to continue to work with them on coordinating how we can.
I'm sorry to add on, I mentioned the county and Marin sea level rise, but yes, I would like to maybe have a standing agenda item for us about where we are with the town's CAP, Climate Action Plan, how the board can help you and how the plan will affect boards in dialogue with our constituents.
Yeah, this newsletter, I think, is a great communication channel. And I was going to suggest, RJ, maybe you want to kind of maybe tell the story of how you did this test of the check valve, just to make sure our residents know that, good work is being done around, does this thing work? Does this solution work? And it sounds like, it's a good story to tell.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I would like to ask, and I don't know if this necessarily needs to be for the next agenda item, but it's a general question. I believe that we get our rating for the town's effort on flood control board redone on an annual basis.
With FEMA, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, I think that it should be, close to happening. So if you can kindly let us know how progress is going on your end, by next one or the following one, whenever it's pertinent, that would be great.
Yeah, I believe we recertify or resubmit in October. So we were planning on bringing the newsletter to you 1 or 2 meetings before then, say end of summer, probably at the latest August for the FEMA newsletter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for us and the public to know that this is a long-term effort that you guys are putting in getting us certified or recertified and trying to get extra points to lower.
Yeah, the insurance rates go down the higher your points. Did you know that? Yeah, of course. But I think that's good for everyone to know.
Lower your rating, higher your points. Yeah.
Right. And the better your insurance rates.
Right. Yep.
And then another request, I wonder if it would be not too difficult for you to educate us and the public with a relatively simple hydraulic gray line diagram that shows from where to where flow goes by gravity or pumping. Something simple that hopefully you don't even have to do that. It may be in some of our planning documents already exist. And it may be like a 5 to 10 minutes presentation on how the system works, the gravity flows versus pumping, and that I think would be helpful to also for us understand where the investments are happening and which portion of the overall system we're talking about. That may be selfishly more for my own education that I may not be familiar with the full system, and rather hear every time that we meet where the improvements are happening without having the holistic view.
Yeah.
If it makes sense.
I think really the PowerPoint that you had showing the pump stations here and where they pump, along with the watersheds, would be a great document for all of us to have.
I agree with that. I think that if these presentations can be made available, but what I had in mind is maybe a little difficult for me to explain without drawing, but I was thinking, you have a marsh and you pump over here, and there are some gates that control this gravity flow to the other marsh, and there's a pump that from here goes out to the bay. So a schematic that shows elevations and pumping versus gravity flow and the major assets along the way. And then when you say, I need to improve the
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 cap-
gate control here or the pump over here. we have the
capacity,
visual
yeah.
or the capacity of this.
Because
of
they're talking
this
about dredging now,
pump,
which is
yeah.
another thing.
So you will be like, see, this pump needs to be enlarged because I'm pumping from it, and the storage here is reduced. And I can either increase the pumping or increase the storage. So that's where I think that Peter or you or Andre were.
Yeah,
talking about
and the,
trade-offs.
the discussion we had today was based on our first field visit. And so if you're supportive of this assessment, there'll be many opportunities to come back and really dive into the details and go through diagrams and explanations, just like you mentioned. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's for future consideration.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Meeting adjourned.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.